Yeah. Let's just wait for a few minutes or let's say 3 more minutes for more people to join the call by start. All right. I hope I'm audible enough though.
Yes, you are.
All right, thank you. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right. Let's just wait. All right, so just to on the side, right? Everyone has installed Minikube and set it up on their local, right? Today.
Yeah.
So to do a quick recap of what we did last week. Um so we built a deployment or a pod for MongoDB, right? So MongoDB is a database, right? You kind of know is a NoSQL database, right? And it's not like let's say Postgres or MySQL that are relational database, right? So we what we did was to build the manifest file for a deployment easy, right? So if you remember everything, your kind is telling you what kind of resource you want to declare, right? So to give it the name of the deployment, this is how you talk to your like interact with the deployment resource. Selector as in this is how the deployment knows what pod should be under the deployment, right? And this is where you declare your pod template, right? Describe the pod that will be created, right? So when you are building the pod, right? This is a metadata is just like additional information you want to add into the pods, right? So you're giving it a label. There are a lot of things you can do. There are a lot of metadata, right? I think there are a lot of them, but the most common is labels. But you see the rest, initializers, and I think the one you most like, and yeah, namespace, right? There's namespace where it's kind of like you're separating each. Let's say you're in a company and you are like you have different projects you're working on. Someone might be working on a recommendation system, another group working on fraud detection, right? So how do you separate those two projects? Maybe you're working in the same Kubernetes node. That's where the namespace comes in, right? Where you can separate each of those projects into different names, and one is not interfering with the other one, right? So that's when names. I think those are the most important right labels you can use in metadata. Sorry about that. Um, so let me continue. So these specifications, right? You're specifying they're describing the pod, the container, because like I said, in a pod, the container runs in a pod, and a pod is just like an envelope or an environment around the pod, right? So, sorry, around the container. So we're calling the container MongoDB, and the image is the MongoDB, which will be downloaded from Docker Hub, right? Or whatever. You have to specify which other parts, because they're not, it's not only Docker Hub. I think there's Elastic something, I've forgotten the name, on AWS too, and each cloud service has their Docker repository about things like that. And specify a resource limits, the memory, CPU, the ports for the pod, right, or the container. Then we specify the environment variables we use to declare like configurations for the database, right? Root username and root password. How do you want to access the roots? Like have what's it called? Privileges, right? Privilege access to your MongoDB, right? So this is how it goes. And we also created a service, right, to connect to your pod. And I explained that it's better to connect to a service than to a pod because, like I said, pods go down and come up, and a lot of things happen to them. They're updated, and the IP addresses change, right? So your service is constant. It stays constant. It's something you can depend on. So that's why it's better to connect to your service, right, instead of a pod. Right. Okay, so today we'll be building on top of that, and we'll be building something called Mongo Express, right? Mongo Express, Express. Oh, wow, right? So what's Mongo Express? So if I go on Docker Hub, Docker, Docker, the error will be resolved. Mongo Express. So in the documentation, you get like what Mongo Express is, the web-based MongoDB admin interface written with Node and Express, right? So it's just like if you want to interact with database normally, you have to use CLI, command line interface, right? Then you go about typing some commands, right? So I'm using Ubuntu now, and I think the way to let me show you. Okay. PostgreSQL is not okay, yeah. So this is for Postgres SQ, and is the like a way to interact with it, right? You have to use the command line shell. And there's also something called pgadmin, right? Pgadmin is the web-based interface, right? So instead of using the command shell, you can use the web interface because you can look at it and see what you're doing. So right now we're just going to create a deployment file for this, right? And we're going to be using some configurations, right? So these are the configurations we're going to be working with. The MongoDB admin username that we created, right? The root username and and we're going to also give it a URL for our MongoDB service, right? Or because it's a web UI, but we need to connect it with MongoDB, right? So it can interact with our MongoDB deployment or pod. So this is what we'll be doing today. Everything's easy for you. The Kubernetes extension, right? You cannot start deployment. I'm going to like give you what's it called? A sample YAML file that you can edit for your own use case. All right, so I'll call it Mongo Express, right? And so this is how the deployment the pods that is going to interact with. When you're creating your pod with the templates, this is what you want to be in the metadata of that pod. And this is going to be the container, right? The container specs. And we're naming the container Mongo Express, and we want to determine what the image name would be. And if you want to know the image name, you just have to come to the Docker Hub or wherever you are hosting it and copy the name, right? Mongo Express or this name, anyone. And sorry about that. And Mongo, and you can just type in the Mongo Express here, right? And the ports, you have where does the container work, or what is the port that the container is open on, right? And it's most likely 8081. It was most likely web UI, right? So yeah, so that's it. We just need to put in the port here, 8081, right? And that's that for the spec and the port. So like I said, we need to now configure something, environment variables, right? If you just run it like this, it's going to use the default username, password, and it's not going to connect to the MongoDB because you have already specified a root and a, a password, right? So what I'll do, I'll just copy this. I'll copy this here since I hope I'm still audible. I just got internet connection is unstable. I hope I'm still audible. Okay, so I'll just copy this. Something about the spaces. All right. Okay. So everything is set. So what we need to change now are the environment names. Right. This is the environment name for MongoDB, but for Mongo Express it's most likely something different. So we are going to come here and copy this, right? This is the admin username. And we can see that we are accessing a value key. Something wrong here. This is not the something wrong with this configuration. Okay, um so this is the environment variable that we're working with now. And like I said, we are going to pick that value from the secret, right? We are picking the value from the same secret from MongoDB. And this is like the reason why we created and what they call it, a different manifest file for the secrets, because we want to share that secret with other services that might be using it. In our case, Mongo Express is using those configurations, and that's why we are referencing it back here. Because so we see that, remember that we created a secret called MongoDB secret and named it MongoDB secret. And so we're referencing that same name here just in the Mongo Express configuration, right? And we're also using a key for the username and the password. So that's why it's best practice to create these kind of configurations outside that can be referenced by other services. Okay, today I'm also going to be showing us what a config map is and how to use a config map, right? So the next thing we want to environment variable we're going to change is the server name, right? The server, MongoDB server. And it's like the IP address we're going to use to connect the IP address. Let me say the address for the MongoDB, right? That's why if we just use the default, it's not going to connect because we're connecting with the MongoDB service instead of the pod, right? So let me create that. Call it the name. Then we say value from, right? Value from. Now, the difference now is that we're going to be taking our value from a config map, right? So why is it a config map? Because we're not really going to hide the IP address of our, or we don't want to hide the IP address of our MongoDB um, service, because it's not something that is worth hiding. It's not like something that needs to be protected, like username and password. So I will create a file called MongoDB YAML. So I'm going to create config map. What's it typing? Config map and sorry, config map resource. And we're going to name it Mongo Mongo, let me see, Mongo config, right? And so what we're going to be storing here is the database URL. And what's the value for the database URL? Remember, we're going to connect with the MongoDB service, right? So it's Mongo service that we're going to connect with. Okay, let me recap, right? We created a MongoDB deployment, and we created a service, right? And we say that to best connect with your MongoDB pod is through the service. So we want to connect MongoDB, right? MongoDB with Mongo Express. And how do you want to connect that? Through the service for MongoDB, right? So that's why we created a config map. And for the database URL, we're specifying the Mongo service, which is the same thing as this, sorry, MongoDB service. Let me copy this so I don't make a mistake. MongoDB service. Okay, so and under the hood, there'll be something like a service discovery that like Kubernetes does, right? And it knows, it just uses the service discovery to know to convert that to an IP address. A lot of bug details that are not important, but it's just easy stuff, right? Instead of typing in a long IP address or anything, you just need to reference the service that you're connecting with the name, and you have that and you use that in your configuration. Okay, so since we're not using a secret key, a secret here, we're going to name this thing as config map keyref. And we're going to specify a name of the config map we're using. And the name of that is Mongo config, right? And the key we're going to reference the database. The key that we use to store the database URL is just database URL, right? So if I was supposed to get database URL. Okay, still trying an error for me. Okay, now we forgot to write in the environment name for the database, right? So if you look at this here, you see that there are a lot of configuration. This is just basic. If you want to change the username and password you want to use to like, don't worry, I'll explain this. But this controls how you want to log into Mongo Express, right? Now, like I said, this is what is important. MongoDB root username and root password. And this is the server that we're going to, like the database URL we're going to connect to. So we're going to copy that and put that in here. And that's that for the Mongo Express configuration. I'll need to let me just run this. I hope my mini cube is up already. I don't know if that's up. If I shut it down sometime ago. All right. Okay, so I can do I hope I'm still audible. Kubectl get or is what's running, right? So it's just this. So I just need to go to this particular folder where I'm working from. Can close this. I can just say kubectl apply. The file name is app2. We've created all the configuration, the deployment, the secrets, the deployment for the MongoDB, Mongo Express, right? And sorry, MongoDB and also the service for MongoDB. Okay, so I can just do kubectl. Let me see. Let me see. Get service. No, not get service. Get all because we use the default namespace. I see that Express and deployment is running. And so we can just do kubectl log, right, of Mongo Express, of this Mongo Express deployment. And we see that no custom config is found. Welcome to Mongo Express. It's supposed to have shown something. Okay. It didn't. Okay. All right, so we use the basic username and password, and so what's left is how we'll connect to the Mongo Express, right? How will we display the UI and everything, right? So the next thing is to create a service for Mongo Express, and I'll just do that under here. So 3 dots, and I call it service, right? And we are going to name the service, let me say Mongo Express service, Mongo Express service. Your Mongo Express service, and is going to work with Mongo Express. You need to connect with Mongo Express, and the port we're going to use is port 8081, and it's going to connect to the port 8081 of the deployment, right? Like I said, this port works with the port 8081, and the service is going to receive connection at port 8081 and forward it to the target port at port 8081 of the pod. Hope that makes sense. So I'm going to add something else. There is another kind of syntax I want to add called the type. So for this, there are different like types, right? There's a cluster IP, which is the familiar one, right? This is the popular one. If I do kubectl get service, you see that is most likely cluster IP, cluster IP. MongoDB use the default. The default type is cluster IP and cluster IP, right? And so we see that there's no external IP because it's just inside the cluster, and the port is 27017. And so I want to create something called a node port or a load balancer, right? I want to use a load balancer, and a load balancer is going to like most likely work with an external IP. But because we don't have an external IP, it's going to be showing pending. Let me recap. A cluster IP is the default type, right? It's the default type, and it doesn't need an external IP. It's an internal, let me say, internal service that does the kind of forwarding of requests throughout in the pod, right? And there's something called the node port and the load balancer, right? These are like special cases, right? They allocate like ports on the node, and sorry, the node port allocates a port on the node, and you can from your own node connect to the particular service, right? And there's now the load balancer. Load balancer is something more complex, right? Load balancer, it's if you know what load balancing is, it's something that works on cloud, right? So it gets requests and it kind of shares the request to the right services. It does the kind of not you can't load balancing, like as the name suggests, right? So it doesn't overload, so you don't get an overload in your system, something as basic as that. So also with the introduction of this load balancer type, we have to introduce something called the node port. Hope I get the name right. Node port. You most likely use camel case here. Yeah, the node port. So I'm going to, and the node port has a specific range between 3,000 to 4,000, but it's not in this documentation. So I'm sorry, 30,000 to 40,000. So I'll just put in 30,000. And if I create the service now, if I come here and write and apply, or sorry, put in and apply, it will notice that I created a Mongo Express service. And if I do kubectl get service, see that it's now load balancer, and it's trying to create an external IP, but can't create an external IP. Why? Because this is not hosted on the cloud, and it doesn't. My PC doesn't have the functionality of having an external IP, right? But if you're working on a cloud like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, it will most likely give you an external IP, which you can just use your browser and connect to that IP, right? And to be displayed, right? But for our use cases, since we're on a local deployments, you can run a command called minikube service and the name of the service, right? So what this is you do is like most likely create a pod. So you create a somewhat external IP for you, and you just have access to the service on your UI, right? So if I do that, let's see, can't connect. Can't connect here. What? 30,000. Why aren't you connecting? All right, so it's not connecting, most likely because of a port issue. Let me copy this into here and see. Or that port is taken, most likely. It's taken. So what I'll do is that I'll change the port. Okay. No, I have to use this port. So what I'll do is I'll change the port and try it again. Hopefully it works. Or let me do some what's it called? Some troubleshooting, because this stuff like this always happens every time, right? Okay, I'm seeing an error, could not connect to database using connection string MongoDB service. So that's why I'm getting that error that's not showing. So it's most like an error issue with my password. Sorry. I just hope I didn't. Oh, I didn't change the sorry about that. I didn't change the environment name. That's why copy and pasting is not good, actually. So I didn't copy the right password, right? So if you look at the logs, right, it told me could not connect to database in connection to a MongoDB username undefined, right? Undefined because it didn't see the password. Even if I put it in this environment variable, it didn't know what to do with that environment name because it's not built for that. So what I'll do is I'll delete all of that and recreate again. Let me delete it just to be sure. So if I delete that and I apply again, okay. So if I do a log, uh, no, it must like give me different kubectl get pods. It's running. So if I do kubectl logs, Mongo Express. All right, hopefully now it's working. Even though they didn't drop any info that is connected successfully, let's just hope it works now. So I will run that minikube service, Mongo Express service. And oh, another error. And this is getting bad. Open another terminal. Got the same error. Mm. Saying there's a timeout error. MongoDB service. It's hopefully that's the same name. Sorry, I just want to check out everything that is here. MongoDB service. What's 270? This is a weird error. Mm, mm. It's almost like it's not seeing the service up. So let me just do something. MongoDB service. Up, up is up. Right. Um, let me just include this configuration file. Secret keyword. Something wrong here. I don't know why I feel there's something wrong here. All right, so I don't know why this isn't working. But let me try out with, I've already done this before. So what I'll do now is delete, right? Let me create it, but with the other application. Let's see if it will come up. If I do the same thing, Mongo Express service, still the same thing. Just don't know why it's showing this error now. Okay. 4881. Hmm. I'm shooting this, it's going to take some time. All right. Yes. In the same error. There might be some mismatch somewhere. All right, let me remember something. I might have a Docker container up. It's not up. Wait, issue. Username password, MongoDB service. This has to work. This definitely has to work. I don't know why it's showing me an error now, but I can log that. Okay, let me run the log for the MongoDB deployment to see if there's any error issue. Everything is supposed to work. We should have in um, Mongo. In Kubernetes, a lot of these kind of errors just come up and they're kind of wondering something that worked before, why isn't it working again? So it- it's oh, Mongo Express crash. It's crashing. Why is it crashing though? All right, looks like it's up now. So it's just crashing for no reason. Wow, it's up and I don't know why. So for some reason, it's up and it's most likely because of a collision somewhere, IP address collision. Well, let me celebrate my win. Okay. There was an issue somewhere with that service, so most likely that's why. So all right, let me celebrate my win that I finally got up because it was crashing for some reason. And you can see that we have access to our MongoDB deployment. I will have the node version, the uptime, 100 seconds, the connections, available connections, and we can see all what's happening in our database, right? And we can also create a database, let's say test DB, and test DB is on. We can view that it has been created. We can also like create, delete, and so the Mongo Express user interface um, is just like an easy way of interacting with your MongoDB instead of going to the command line and using some command line in commands that are kind of not like easy to remember, stuff like that. So I'm done with the session for today. You can see that Kubernetes is a very, let me say, a wild tool. Like it works, and sometimes it just throws you errors, and you have to do a lot of debugging and refreshing to see what's going on, what's actually going on with this configuration. And so if you ever have errors, and I know you have errors, you most likely have to debug well, look at what's breaking and come up with solutions. And you most likely have to do a lot of Google search, like copying in the command errors, like the one I was getting, and pasting on Google and seeing what people have been facing and how they solved it, right? You most likely have to do that a lot. That's how the Kubernetes data engineering field is. So if there are any questions, please you can ask me now. Yes. Sorry,
Good afternoon. Please, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. First of all, my question is, please, I want to confirm how important or significant is Kubernetes to a data engineer? The reason why I'm asking this question is, since the time I've been learning and been training myself to become a data engineer, I've always been working on cloud, and I know that Kubernetes works better on cloud. So now that you are teaching us the Kubernetes locals or something, I just want to know how significant it is to data engineer. Is it something that we need? Just how significant it is to data engineer. Thank you.
All right. Many of the tools that you might use are most likely built on Kubernetes, right? Many of the tools, and there's two. They are like, how will I put it? They are data engineers in in a machine learning setting, and they are data engineers as in data setting, right? Right. You might also say that's the MLOps engineer, right? A lot of tools are actually built on Kubernetes, and if you want to like see how they work, like in the basic level, you most likely have to know Kubernetes, right? And Kubernetes is even on the cloud. I know what you're talking about. There are a lot of already cloud services, right? Like if you work AWS, most likely AWS Glue, think AWS. There are a lot of tools actually. I've forgotten actually the Redshift, and most of them are most likely built on Kubernetes, and they work with Kubernetes. You most likely have to Dockerize something. If you work with AWS Lambda, you Lambda functions, you Dockerize it, and if you want to scale, you most likely use Kubernetes for deploy to an REST API. And so most of the times, if you just want speed, reduce latency, whatever you're working, if you're what do you call it? Yeah, deploying something to users, right? Users want to interact with that. You most likely have to use Kubernetes because it can scale and downscale, it can replicate, it can heal, it can do a lot of those load balancing kind of effects, right? So at some point, depending on how many users, maybe in the morning you have more users, Kubernetes can know that it needs to auto scale and and also destroy it when there are not a lot of users. And that's why a lot of tools are built on top of Kubernetes, right? Like Kubeflow that you'll be taught on, a lot of orchestration tools too, like Airflow or Argo. They're just built on Kubernetes being. So yeah, Kubernetes is a very, very important. So even though you might not be physically using it, you just know that some of the tools are built on top of them. Right. So so if there are no further questions, I'll like to end the session. Thank you for being present. I will encourage you to get your hands dirty on some of these things and see practically why what all this means, right? By actually building something. Okay, all right. So thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. So Sorry. Thank you, Hakim. Just to add a bit to the a response to what Hakim have said. So I heard the guys talking about using it locally. The reason why you are being taught Kubernetes locally is because before you can, most of the times you have to go to the cloud, but before you can, whatever it is you are doing on the cloud, you need to be able to interact with it. So your local development is where you're able to test out all of your changes and all. So when you are sure that your code or your orchestration, your manifest file and all are working locally, then you can move those manifest files from your local development to the cloud. So you have Kubernetes on the cloud. So using Kubernetes and Minikube on your local PC is just a way for you as a data engineer to be able to test whatever it is that you have. And looking at it on a larger scale level, when you start working for organizations, you will not want to be dependent on other organizations for tools that you are using. So as a data engineer, you might be in charge of the whole pipeline you might be in charge of the whole pipeline of ensuring that you have access to your data at any point in time. So you might not be your company, your organization might not want to be dependent on, let's say they don't want to be dependent fully on AWS, for example, that if AWS EKS service, that's the Elastic Kubernetes service, if it is down, then that means your organization cannot have access to your data also. Why? Because you are dependent on it. So when you have all of these things, you are able to have deployments where you are in total control and you are not what's in depth of any issue that other organizations are facing. So that's another very important thing to note as data engineers. So your experience with Kubernetes is a plus for you in whatever aspects it is you have. Okay. So if there's nothing else, then Wakim, thank you very much for the session. You guys have a wonderful rest of the day and bye bye for now.